So I recently posted a video on the gender wage gap, analyzing the reasons behind it, and also taking a look at Kamala Harris's plan to close it. Now that turned out to be a long video, and I had to leave an awful lot out. So this is kind of an addendum to that. If you didn't see the last video, let me recap very quickly. Advocates for equal pay for women are fond of citing implicit or unconscious bias as the primary driving force behind the wage gap. We showed numerous other factors that I believe are a much better argument for the wage gap than implicit bias. Now, I'd like to clarify my position on the contribution of discrimination to the wage gap. I don't think it's nothing. Undoubtedly, there are women who are discriminated against at work, women who lose out on opportunities simply because they're women, women who are harassed, women who don't even feel safe. And these situations need to be eradicated. But I don't believe the government can regulate or legislate these out of existence. These problems have to be solved where they occur. It is first and foremost the responsibility of the employer to create a safe and conducive environment where women can do their best work and realize the opportunities they deserve. Having said that, there's a lot of data out there undercutting the unconscious bias theory, and numerous studies pointing to legitimate factors other than bias that are driving the wage gap. And that was a key point that I made in the first video. We also deconstructed some of the problems with the test used to measure implicit bias. That's known as the Implicit Attributes Test, or IAT. And we showed that to be founded on some very shaky ground. So the real question about the IAT is whether it measures anything other than the ability of the subject to sort concepts quickly. What we didn't show is Hart Blanton's work on this. Dr. Blanton is a PhD in psychology and a well-known critic of the IAT and its validity. He wrote a paper known as Arbitrary Metrics. What the IAT does is measure sorting speed, and any differential in that speed is attributed to bias. But how do you do that? How do you go from the IAT measuring in milliseconds to strong, moderate, or slight bias? The answer is arbitrarily. We also saw that if the same individual takes the test twice, that you can't predict the second test score from the first. And yet this is the tool we rely upon to identify and measure a whole host of evils. It's very understandable why people on the left love the unconscious bias argument. It's a surefire way to stop any argument dead in its tracks. Supposedly unconscious bias afflicts everyone, but those afflicted have no idea that they're carrying around this bias. It lies dormant, waiting to take control and afflict marginalized people. So let's say you find yourself in a conversation with someone over a topic where there's disagreement. You lay out your case, and your opponent comes back with, "You're obviously biased." You respond, "No, of course not." Your opponent then says, "Yes, you are. You have unconscious bias. Everyone has unconscious bias, but you're not aware of it. I know you're biased. You don't know you're biased." Where do you take the conversation from there? It's over. All you can do is walk away shaking your head in disbelief. Now, let me give you what I think is a hilarious example of how far social scientists are willing to run with the concept of unconscious bias. Did you know that there is a bias against gender bias studies? A 2018 paper found that gender bias studies are less well funded than other bias studies and run in lower impact journals. To understand what a low impact journal is, you have to understand the concept of citations. A citation is when another researcher uses your research in their research, either as a foundation, a springboard for new research, or to support a concept that they are using in their research publication. It's a vote of confidence from your peers. So high impact journals publish papers that get a lot of citations. Low impact journals publish a lot of papers that don't get a lot of citations. So this is the argument. Gender bias studies run in low impact journals and receive less funding than, say, racial bias studies. And this, of course, has to be due to bias. It's a surefire excuse for any failure. It's not that you wrote a crappy paper that good journals wouldn't run. No, it's that the good journals are biased against gender bias papers in general. The far left loves the concept of unconscious bias so much They see the utility in it so clearly that just yesterday, as of this filming, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, hereafter AOC, has broadened the concept to the point of breaking, applying it to white supremacy, claiming that we all have the seed, the virus, of white supremacy lurking within us, lying dormant, waiting to jump out and afflict marginalized populations. Why is she doing this? She's doing it so she can shut down opposition to her policies. If you support policies contrary to hers, that makes you a white supremacist, because she says so. And if you are a person who supports a person who opposes her policies, then you too are a white supremacist. This is wildly irresponsible, it's logically laughable, and it's dangerous. I hate to break it to AOC, but most people in this country are reasonable, thinking, well-intentioned people. They're not white supremacists. Just because you are in favor of border security and question whether reparations are a good idea or even workable does not make you a white supremacist. But the left isn't having it. You either accept their platform wholesale or you're a white supremacist. They're sowing seeds of fear. They're attempting to intimidate people into shutting up. We cannot allow them to silence opposition. I'll close with another piece I left out of the original video. Reporter Jesse Signal wrote an excellent in-depth piece for New York Magazine on unconscious bias and the IAT in particular. In an email exchange with one of the test pioneers, Maharan Banaji, Signal was surprised that she attempted to smear critics of the IAT, strongly suggesting that the critics were either racist or in need of psychotherapy. That's the intellectual equivalent of tapping out. If that's all you have, you're obviously out of ammunition. So that's the addendum to the first video. You'll find links in the description below for more information, and we'd sure appreciate your liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks so much for your attention.